Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Sandy Smith. Today, we commemorate the 103rd anniversary of the formation of the Royal Australian Air Force. Military aviation was pioneered during the First World War, with aircraft operated by armies and navies. By the late stages of the war, however, aerial fighting was recognised as a distinct form of warfare. While Great Britain combined the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps to form the Royal Air Force in 1918, the 4 squadrons of the Australian Flying Corps remained part of the Australian Imperial Force. Following the disbandment of the AFC at the end of 1919, the Australian Air Corps was created on the 1st of January 1920. Then, on the 31st of March 1921, the Australian Air Corps was separated from the Army to form the Australian Air Force. A few months later, in August, the new Air Force would be given royal assent, becoming the Royal Australian Air Force. Over the past 103 years, the RAF has established a proud record of service encompassing the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, as well as more recent involvement in East Timor, the Solomon Islands, and the Middle East. Thousands of Australians have served in the RAF, operating in conjunction with other air forces across the globe. Sadly, some have fallen. Today, we pay our respects to the men and women commemorated here on the Roll of Honour, and to the survivors who returned home. We warmly welcome the family of Flying Officer John Hester Venn, whose story will be told shortly by Commander Christopher Money of the Royal Australian Navy, who is Flying Officer Venn's great-nephew. We are honoured to acknowledge Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Robert Chipman and Mrs. Elise Chipman, Warrant Officer of the Air Force Ralph Clifton and Mrs. Melissa Clifton, and the accompanying delegation. We also warmly welcome Group Captain Alan George retired, representing the Air Force Association. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We warmly welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier.
pressed on!
I now invite you, if able, to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catafalque Party, attention! Catafalque Party, present! Arms!
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catafalque Party, shoulder! Arms! Catafalque Party, order! Arms!
If you are able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where all families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament. Flowers of the forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Flying Officer John Hester Venn. John Venn was born at Dardanup in Western Australia on the 28th of September 1921. Known as Johnny, he was the youngest of 8 children born to Frank and Jeannie Venn. Johnny grew up alongside his siblings on Menara Station near Murrin in Western Australia's Goldfields Esperance region. He was sent nearly 800 kilometres southwest to board at Guildford Grammar School in Perth. While there, he excelled in boxing, swimming and hockey, as well as academics. After finishing at school, Johnny remained in Perth. He worked for Elder Smith and Company before settling in as a clerk at TG Mutual Life Insurance on St George's Terrace and playing hockey for the Guildford Grammar Old Boys team. In 1939, he joined the militia, parading part-time with the 16th Infantry Battalion, known as the Canberra Highlanders of Western Australia. John Venn enlisted in the Royal Australian Air Force on the 20th of June 1940 at the age of 18. After initial training in Somers, Victoria, he began training as a pilot. In August 1940, Venn joined No. 3 Elementary Flying Training School in Essendon for further flight training. 2 days after arriving in Essendon, he was involved in a de Havilland Tiger Moth crash. The aircraft took off on an instructional flight at 8:03 a.m. with Venn and pilot officer B.J. Clifton on board. Almost immediately after takeoff, the Tiger Moth stalled and spun into the ground, leaving Johnny with mild injuries and pilot officer Clifton with facial injuries. The crash caused extensive damage to the aircraft, a reminder to the dangers of pilot training. Johnny Venn went on to train at No. 1 Service Flying Training School at Point Cook and was awarded his flying badge on the 16th of December 1940. On New Year's Eve, having recently returned from Christmas leave, he took out one of the school's Avro Ansons, flying it below 1,500 feet outside of the prescribed low flying area. Following a brief investigation, he was confined to barracks for 14 days for punishment for contravening orders. Venn left Point Cook in early February 1941, having been promoted to sergeant and confirmed as a pilot. Over the next 11 months, Venn was posted to Mount Gambier, Laverton and Nihil. He got into trouble with his commanding officer once more, again while flying an Anson. In May 1941, he was admonished and fined £1 for negligently damaging an aircraft after he taxied aircraft in such a manner that it collided with another. Venn joined No. 7 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force on the 19th of January 1942 at Laverton, Victoria, and remained with the squadron until early March, when he was transferred to No. 2 Squadron in Darwin. Venn undertook 6 patrol flights in March 1942, mostly over Timor and the surrounding ocean. Before dawn on the 13th of May 1942, 8 Lockheed Hudsons from No. 2 Squadron and No. 13 Squadron took off from Darwin, each aircraft carrying a full bomb load. Their target was Japanese shipping in Ambon Bay, over 1,000 kilometres to the north. One of the Hudson was piloted by Venn with 3 other crew members on board. Venn flew his aircraft low, dropping his bombs at masthead height on an enemy vessel. One of the airmen remembered that he felt a whoomp of air pressure and looked across. Venn's aircraft had exploded into small pieces about the time he would have started his turn. Venn's Hudson had been caught in the explosion of the Japanese vessels below. It was one of 2 aircraft not to return to base after the attack, with the other being shot down by a Japanese fighter. Flying Officer John Venn was declared missing in air operations, presumed dead, along with crew members Sergeant Walter John James, Sergeant Brian Andrew Kilpatrick, and Sergeant Leonard Arthur Omsby. It was later reported that Sergeant Omsby had survived the explosion, had been captured by the Japanese on Ambon Island, and then executed. Johnny Venn was 20 years old. His remains were never recovered. Today he is remembered on the Ambon Memorial among the 450 soldiers and airmen who died in the region and have no grave. Following Johnny's death, his family were informed that the Royal Australian Air Force intended to name an aerodrome in honour of his conspicuous ability and loyalty with which he served his country. The Venn Aerodrome in the Northern Territory was named on the 8th of January 1943 and is now the Venn Emergency Airstrip near the Tyndall RAF base outside Katherine. Closer to home, John Venn's name was listed on the Dardanup Roll of Honour, as well as an altar consecrated to his memory at St Mary's Church in Dardanup. His name is also listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among the 40,000 Australians who died serving in the Second World War. And his photograph, with his cheeky grin, is displayed by the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Flying Officer John Hester Venn, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
Catapult Party present! Arms!
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them.
Shoulder! Arms!
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult Party in words! Turn! Catapult Party, quick! March!
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.